Hello, welcome to this webinar on Participatory Research and Action, PRA, a methodology that I used to empower participants in a National Research Fellowship project. My name is Geraldine O'Neill. I'm an Associate Professor at UCD Teaching and Learning, and I did this research as part of the National Forum Teaching and Learning Research Fellowship. Okay, well, the aims of the webinar are, first of all, I want to describe what Participatory Research and Action is. Then I want to discuss how I implement this approach in a National Teaching and Learning Research Fellowship project, and then critique the approach and discuss its application for other researchers. The research that I did was part of a fellowship that was one of Ireland's inaugural Teaching and Learning Research Fellowships. And when I got this fellowship, I decided to do some research into the area of work-based assessment. And the start-off question that I had was exploring barriers and solutions to an emerging assessment challenge. So I was really looking at the area of work-based learning. It had a lot of different stakeholders involved, students and other stakeholders. And I really wanted to identify a key challenge as articulated by these, both staff and students, and negotiate some of the challenges and identify some good practices for informing policy and informing practice. So some of the key words that were coming out of this research question were things like solutions, an emerging challenge, and different stakeholders. And so it was for this reason that I started to look at how I might actually use participatory research and action in this area of assessing work-integrated learning. When I looked at the literature around assessing work-integrated learning, a really nice quote that I came across was that assessment of work-integrated learning could become a bureaucratic exercise, and that distracts if the student and supervisor, so two key stakeholders, are not invested in the assessment practices as relevant to the workplace. Therefore, the assessment design needs to contain an aspect of the practice of industry, not just a university, to make sense of or used by both sets of members and allow for some emergent elements, this idea of emergent. Students acting as brokers are then able to coordinate activity and meaning across the two communities while constructing their professional identities for the communities they wish to join. So this quote shows that the different stakeholders in assessing work-integrated learning, which can happen on and off campus, are really, really key. So these multiple stakeholders really need to come together as partners in work-integrated learning. And there's three key stakeholders. There's the higher education staff, the students, and the work placement staff. So thinking of this, I thought, well, I need to have a merging, so it had to be something that was flexible. I needed something that was going to involve different stakeholders if this assessment of work-integrated learning was challenges in it were to be sort of addressed. And therefore, I thought of more participatory research approaches. And this table gives an overview of the general suite of participatory research approaches. And you can see that there's research about action, they're local people, local priorities, empowerment, problem identification together. You can see the common things that coming out from this type of research really matched what I was trying to look at and what I was trying to do. And the conventional sort of types of research are down to the right-hand side here. So this really in the middle here was what I was trying to achieve in my research. So it made me really look at participatory approaches. So one approach that I thought about, and one I had done before, because a while back in 2007, I had done a workshop with Eileen Kane from UCD School of Social Justice around participatory research and action. And I really thought, this could really work well in this research. Different language around it, different terminology. She and authors in this area called it Participatory Research and Action, but it's also known as Participatory Learning and Action, PLA. So these terms you see interchangeably, these terms here. But it originally started from more rural appraisal and rapid rural development, so really sort of third world development kind of research where people were talking to people on the ground and trying to change practice on the ground. So sometimes you can often see it as that kind of language. Robert Chambers has written a lot about it. He kind of brought forward the idea. And so there's some really nice resources around, the workshops and the kind of styles of research. So that Robert Chambers' work is really kind of central to this approach. So in looking and I suppose analysing a lot of the literature, some of the key features that really struck me around this approach is, first of all, is participatory, as mentioned by these authors. Next, it's meaningful actions and solutions are generated. So you're really trying to work with people on the ground and work with the different stakeholders. So the inter-stakeholder dialogue is really key. That's what I wanted as well. But a particularly different emphasis in this, it's group consensus. It's about trying to bring a group to come to such a consensus for actions. Another key part of it is that the actions or things you share should be shared quickly for making actions, and it should be practical and flexible. So some of the methodologies that are used in the Participatory Research and Action, PRA, are some of these. Pie charts, matrices, card sorting, action plans, but discussion is at the heart of the methodology. It really is about people discussing to come up with actions and solutions. But some of these pie charts, card sorts, mapping and diagrams, they're really ways of visualizing what people are trying to talk about with a view to discussing and coming up with solutions. Scenario development, where people maybe come up with sort of different ideas and different kind of scenarios. Interviews, role playing, and open discussion and extracts from discussion notes. So there's a list of authors there who've written about it if you want to have a look at that. It's very kind of unique kind of methodologies that go with these kind of principles of empowering others and stakeholders and action. So, sorry. So my initial step had been, what was the emerging challenge? That was the first bit of my research question. What was the emerging challenge? So I just didn't want to pick a particular area here. I wanted one that was meaningful to the community. So what I was involved in is I was involved in a series of webinars with National Forum QQI around shared challenges and opportunities. And this was a webinar back in June 2020, just kind of around the time that I got the research fellowship. And we had 138 participants. And we put to them what were the one or two critical issues they needed to look at and discuss a little bit further. So this was the community, national level, identifying a priority. So again, in keeping with the community, the local, even though this was nationally, starting out nationally, what was the issues that was identified there. So from the literature, what was coming up was things around authenticity. So the wider international and the national literature talked about authenticity of assessment in work integrated learning. And what they meant here was that assessment and feedback are meaningful, that students have some ownership in the feedback process, that the assessments relate to the identity within the discipline, practitioners are involved in the design and implementation of assessment feedback, and these all come under the idea of authenticity, real meaningful assessment of work integrated learning. And again, key authors there coming through. But when we did talk to people a little bit more in these original webinars before the research, what they also said was meaningfulness and authenticity is really important. But however, consistency is a real challenge. And what they were saying was there should be consistency and comparability in grading across assessors. There should be consistency grading across different placements. There should be clear criteria to help consistency. There should be good procedures to ensure fairness. Fairness was coming up as really key. Particularly the students are saying we want our assessments to be fair. Sometimes when they're going on different placements, it didn't feel fair and they didn't feel they were getting a consistent approach to assessment. And one of the challenges with that actually was that the grading scale might not necessarily have supported good consistency. So it's particularly where there was percentages and grades involved, the consistency of the grades across different placements was really kind of brought through as a challenge. So really the research said, well, listen, we need to do both of these, but it's trying to get the balance between making sure it's really complex, really meaningful, that practitioners involved, but we do also need to make sure it's consistent. So at this point, I decided that the research question from this webinars were around the area authenticity and consistency. I decided to focus on consistency and authenticity. This is what nationally people were looking for. I did a call using kind of the network of people across the sector, including participants in the webinars. But some of the things is really, if you are using this approach, some of the things to really think about at this stage, first of all, if it's going to be local, discipline for me in this case was really key, because discipline is where everything happens in teaching and learning. I think a lot of researchers showed that. So the inclusion criteria was they had to be part of a disciplinary group. So I wasn't doing transdisciplinary or cross-disciplinary in this situation. I was looking at the disciplines, because these are where a lot of the unit of kind of change happens. And they obviously have to experience work-based learning. They have to have an interest in finding solutions to the challenges. They had to identify a key contact, and this is key later when I'm talking about actions later. There needed to be a key contact. They needed to have representatives from the three stakeholders, the students, the practitioners, and the on-campus higher education staff. And I needed to make sure there was a diversity of disciplines representing different contexts. So what the methodology looked like was there were interviews. There was a national survey of expert authors. There was a national survey data that I had access to, but I'm going to particularly focus on this part here, which is the solution-focused online workshops. And just to show that I had 9 disciplines in the end, 2 that were based on campus work integrated learning. So those were people who use project work, problem-based learning types of things that were very linked with the workplace. And then on placement, hospitality, survey construction management, teacher education, business information systems that were on placement that primarily went out and then were assessed by when they came back on campus by some sort of reports. And then on placement where they were assessed by the practitioner was occupational therapy, veterinary nursing, and physiotherapy. So I had 8 institutions and 9 disciplines. And there were students, practitioners, and educators in all those groups. So COVID struck. I thought I'd be doing the workshops, which was the research data gathering thing. I thought I'd be doing it face-to-face and meeting people and being part of the communities, but COVID struck, so I had to bring it all online. So I'm sharing with you my online version, my methodology from the online, but you could work this through if you were thinking of using it in a face-to-face as well. So this was the model I used, building on the PRA approach: individual challenges, group consensus, key challenges, then agreeing some challenges, developing some solutions and potential actions. So that's the methodology that I devised. I did have a research assistant or admin assistant doing the workshops, which was very useful for just managing the workshops, and I was very grateful for that support. So how did I start? The first thing, there was students, the workshops had about 15 to 20 in each workshop. And that was a good number because it was in the 3.5 hours. Each workshop was 3.5 hours. But there were students in every workshop, and there was also people who hadn't met each other. So this individual thing is really key for allowing time for reflection and time for initial thoughts. So I started with a poll, which showed their initial thoughts on the challenges that get them thinking. And I think, again, this is a good part of the methodology. So my particular question was, well, in relation to work related assessment, is it consistency, authenticity, or you're not sure as your key challenge? So that gave them a chance to start thinking. And then I wanted them so again, considering their individual challenges, I got them to brainstorm individually what their 3 or 4 assessment and feedback challenges were. And this was key because it allowed them time to think, because particularly for students, they were allowed some time to think about what they thought before they were thrown into a group discussion and had maybe felt that there was a power dynamic that they felt they may not be able to actually, speak up. So allow them time to put their thoughts down. So in this case, the methodology of kind of the Jamboard was very, very useful for getting notes. And the students, academic staff, practice educators, professional sports staff had a different page where they put them down. And again, around authenticity or consistency. So that gave quite a bit of data, but it allowed them time to think. So then the next part is to go into group, and PRA really needs group consensus and group discussion. They need to talk through their challenges, this idea of inter-stakeholder dialogue, as De Bruin talked about it. So to understand shared challenges and to start to develop some consensus, then we put them into breakout groups, but they've already now thought of things on their own. And they were asked to, as you often do at breakout groups, to have a chair. The key thing here was I actually got the students to be the first set of chairs in the groups. And each workshop would have had maybe sort of 3 or 4 breakout groups, given the numbers. They had about 20 minutes, and they needed to highlight 3 or 4 common. So they had thought about individually, and now they were thinking of common challenges. And the student reported back. So this data was audio recorded. So I had so from a research point of view, I had audio recorded this data. Then we needed to, then what was quite challenging, if this was done in a face-to-face, we would have a chance to kind of synthesize some of these themes. A challenge in Zoom was to actually pull together the 3 breakout groups into some common themes. So we gave a break at this stage to the group workshop, and myself and the research assistants collated the breakout groups challenges into 10 broad themes. So on the spot, while they were having a break, we came up with the 10 themes on the spot that were coming through from the reporting back of the groups. And then we presented these back to the whole group, and they voted on them. So this is an example of the main challenges from one particular workshop, and it weighted them. So this particular group talked about inconsistency in expectations of assessors, impact of the amount and volume of exposure to different skills, placement doesn't have all competencies, we're making up scenarios. So these were their top 3. The others are still there, and we fed that back to them. So the data we had here was the poll results, and this data here weighted. In other aspects of using PRA, there are other ways to get this consensus. And when I used it before with a group of physiotherapy students in UCD, myself and Sinead McMahon, one of the things that we used was this thing called a pie chart. And this is where you get students into, or students or people into groups, and they come up with their themes themselves, but they have to weight them. It's about trying to get the priority of what's the important challenge. And in rural development, as it was done, it was nearly things on the sand. You can use string, you could use a whiteboard where you can actually move the boundaries. But the idea is that the group negotiate, well, do you know, this square here, this slice of the pie here is the biggest challenge, and they negotiate that. So they're coming up with a consensus of what they think is important. So that was another way to do it, not done in my research this time around, but that's what I did before. But things like the card sorting and that is something that was equally used for that. Then we put them back into some breakout groups, and they had to come up with some solutions to the top 3 challenges. So the research is about developing solutions. It is research, as I say, is not about doing unto, it's about working with groups to make them come up with their own solutions and actions. So we put them back into breakout groups, and they had to discuss the top 3. So in this situation, this group would have been, sorry to go back to the previous slide, would have been talking about these 3. So what are the solutions to these 3 challenges now that we've prioritized these 3 for this group, for this workshop? So they took those 3 and they discussed them, and this is the details if you want to have a look at it again, but basically, again, they had to prescribe and come up with some solutions and put them into a shared document. And this situation, I got one of the staff to report back. So the data we had here was the Word document notes, the audio of the report back, and they came up with some solutions. Then we opened up the whole thing to a plenary. The final kind of step was some actions. So we opened up to all in the group. As I say, they were between kind of 10 and 20-ish in the workshops, in each workshop. What would be some actions to this? Therefore, what could you do? And again, the data was collected by notes on the discussion. The research assistant took some notes on the discussion as it was happening, trying to kind of highlight some of the actions that people were coming up with. And there's an audio recording of the plenary. So this was the instructions, come up with some short-term wins, some easy solutions, who would need to be involved, think about these, when would they start, finish, have you all had a chance to have a say? So that was kind of the plenary that we gave to them. So these are some examples of one particular workshop in its raw state. Some of it might have been like to define consistent skills, to be evidence during rotations in each stage in conjunction with the supervisors, to clarify expectations for students, supervisors, and clinical sites. So that, so each had about, between 10 and 12 actions. The key thing about the actions and the key thing about the data that I talked about is that I gathered the Jamboard notes, the poll notes, all the solutions, the document of all the solutions, the document of all the actions. And the key aspect of this research is that I shared it back immediately in its very raw state, not tidied up, not anything, not me trying to put a spin on it, as it was, back to everybody in the group. So they got immediately actions, they got immediate solutions, they got the detail of it was. And it was key then that they had this. And the key contact for the progression of the things was the key contact. But everybody in the group got back within a day or two everything that was got in the workshop. So I did do a quick sort of feedback on it, and that's a really important aspect. Is as you're doing kind of this is one particular method, as I say, but as you're doing any of these methods, you need to get feedback on them. And the question that I asked, and that I was particularly, because I was keen on this idea about empowerment, I did ask them, all the participants, afterwards in a little survey, this aim to empower participants to have a say in actions. Do you feel that's was successful in the workshop? So this one got 4.75 out of 5. And then the workshop aimed to dialogue between those involved in assessment and feedback. Students, higher education staff, did you feel this was successfully achieved in this workshop? And again, the idea of dialogue between multiple stakeholders was 4.82 out of 5. So it's very successful in empowerment and participation in the group. And some of the quotes from those in the group were, there was a good collaboration between students, academic staff, and hospital supervisors, all integral to the success of students during placement, and all were present to contribute to the future of this essential part of the studies. Another quote, really valuable experience to get input from all aspects and points of view. Great to find and excellent identify common themes and potential solutions. And then this one was a student. It was really helpful as a student to talk to practice educators and learn their perspectives on work-based assessment. And I felt as if we were discussing the topic as equals rather than as talking to our supervisors. So this idea of power and feeling that they had a say was really, really key. So I've talked at you, and I just want to maybe open it up there for a minute.
Sorry, Geraldine, I think the sound is gone.
I have access to the data from my ethics and that. So I have the data for a certain length of time based on my ethics, but the data was anonymized and sent back, and that was all clear in the ethics. So that answers that question. There's another question. Were the focus groups discipline specific or a mix of disciplines? That's a very good question. I deliberately did the workshops discipline specific. And the reason for that in this situation was that was where the change was going to happen. So when you think of it, like veterinary nursing had their placements and they would be needed to working with their professional body, and they needed to change in that context. So it was deliberately discipline specific, but it may not always make sense, but my unit of change for this was discipline specific. Yeah, so that was that question. I hope that answers that question. Can I ask what the difference between participatory research and action versus participatory action research? I think the difference really, participatory action research comes from the educational, and I think its strength is more the action. The participatory research and action is this particular roots in the rural development originally, although it has been used in social work, health sciences, and has been taken off. But the participatory research and action pushes group consensus sharing. So there is overlap in some of the principles, but they have some slight differences. And the participation is particularly strong in the participation research and action. Whereas I think the action and the process is a little stronger in the other one. And the group consensus is particularly in the approach that I used. So that's a very good question. Thanks for that. Okay, any other questions while I'm going to probably go back? Did you use any iterative cycle to use your method? I didn't use an iterative cycle like you would in the action research. It's not quite like the action research, which has the review, plan, act cycle. And actually one of the strengths and one of the critiques of this approach is that you need to work with what makes sense for the discipline or the group. So what methods you use and how you do them actually really need to be linked with the purpose. So if there was a kind of a sequence, it might be more around sort of, gathering the challenges, what are the solutions, what are the actions, and sort of putting them back. So it's based more, it's not quite an iterative cycle like I know an action research cycle, but that would be kind of the broad kind of sort of approach to it, if that makes sense. I might take one more and then go on. And David, if there's anything you might pick up on that I've missed, but how was the time broken down in the workshops? Divided equally, greater focus on solutions. Yeah, so to go back to my image, I would say up to the break, which was kind of the challenges and the actions was probably, sorry, the challenges and the coming up with the key challenges was probably half the workshop. So if it was 3.5 hours, that was probably 1.25 hours or something. And then the second half was the solutions and actions. So that breakdown, yeah. I don't know the answer to that framework, the Zuber-Skerritts PALAR framework. Sorry, I can't answer that one. Maybe somebody else can come in on that one, but sorry, I don't know the answer to that one in relation to Zuber-Skerritts framework. Sorry, don't know about the answer to that one. Apologies. Okay, I'm going to move on to the rest of the presentation, and we'll have some time at the end to hear more questions. And David, if you see any questions in there I missed, maybe you might flag them to me at the end. Okay, you can still hear me? Is it okay? I can see you, Marie. Can people hear me okay? Yeah, great. So I just want to talk a little bit about data analysis, findings, and dissemination, just a little bit more about this. For those interested in the actual findings, this was the whole group, 120 across the 9 disciplines. So I then have this broader set of data. So there's the data for each workshop, each discipline that they got. But overall, then I've got 27 challenges of work-based assessment across Ireland, 308 solutions and 129 actions, not to mention all the qualitative data I have with it. Some of the themes that were coming up in this broadly, one of the top themes was having clear expectations in the assessment of work integrated learning, clear expectations. Also, the idea of having more inter-stakeholder dialogue, not unlike the research approach, empowering students managing competencies. In the student survey data, which I haven't really talked about, but 33% of the comments were related to around authenticity. And then consistency, which is in the blue, was more of a challenge in placements that were assessed by the practitioner than they were, say, in placements assessed on campus. And then the authenticity was kind of probably the greatest challenge in this one here, which is where they were assessed by the educator back on practice, but kind of small changes. The weighting for the researchers, when I talked to them, that they really thought authenticity was a very, very important, less so consistency. But when I looked at the Jamboard data, which is small data, but it's interesting data, that the Jamboard data, I kind of coded it by the different challenges. So I read through them and I coded them whether they were authenticity, consistency, both, or other. So blue here is authenticity, and the gray is a consistency as a challenge. So if you look at the students, for example, the students are much more concerned about consistency than they are about authenticity. They're particularly concerned. Interesting, higher education staff are saying, well, it needs to be meaningful and authentic and valuable, and slightly less around the consistency, although both were kind of high. So slight differences in the field from the Jamboard data. The interesting thing about data analysis in this approach is that in some ways the participants are theming the first bit of it for you, because they, if you think of it, they have highlighted and voted on what's most prioritized in their eyes. So they've already done a little bit of analysis by just running these workshops, or again, there's other ways to do it, because they have come up with a group consensus and they have come up with a prioritization. So in some ways, they kind of do the first bit of the analysis for you in a way, because they're coming up with their own themes. But I will be doing, and the timing of this was, I just finished this research in December last, and I'm now starting to work through in a sort of a deeper understanding of the audio data and the discussion notes through a thematic analysis. Braun and Clark is what I will be using and I've started to use. And I've put a lot of the data into Max QDA, and I'm working through, so I'll have a deeper understanding of sort of that kind of data. That, again, for those interested in assessing work integrated learning, a key thing about the sharing aspect of this is that I have shared this back, my findings to date, in a National Forum QQI kind of a symposium. I've shared it back in a report. And the key things about it are, and this is really, really important, it needs to be shared back to the participants or to people who can help make changes in this. If you want to, again, it is about sharing and trying to change policy and practice. And these were sort of the common themes in assessing of work integrated learning. The participants were looking for more talk, more dialogue about this area. The terminology matters. One of the things in that was feedback as a part of assessment is really key, and that assessing work integrated learning was a useful term because work-based learning sounded like it was all out in practice, whereas actually the whole curriculum in this is really key. The manageable set of competencies was really important. There wasn't too many competencies, and that's really got implications for professional accreditation bodies. The grading approaches are really kind of need to be looked at. There was a lot of challenges and difficulties where there was percentages used in placement, and then students were going to different placements and were getting inconsistent grading, because it's very hard in very different contexts to use percentages as a grading or even grades. So pass, fail, not competent, not yet competent were ones that seem to work better in placement. But we really need to look at that in the institution and the sort of different policies and implications there. The practitioner needs more professional development. They need much more around assessment. We needed to empower students more, and students wanted real life experiences in the curriculum. So some of these lean towards authenticity and some lean to consistency. So to go back to, I can certainly talk to people more if they're interested in the findings of the actual research. There is the report out. And this is just out recently. So this is just, the National Forum just put this up very recently, about 2 or 3 weeks ago. But the first thing I did was shared it back with the participants. So I emailed every participant, all 120, this report. So again, they have, I know it was to do with the whole thing, not just theirs, but again, it's sharing back so that they can own as much as own the data. And I've already started to present it, as I mentioned there at the end in December, to the National Forum Vital Week. Quality QQI I've met them about this and the findings of this. I might be doing some follow-up session with them because it impacts on what they're doing. And I talked to the National Forum Student Assembly to give back to the student voice. And both the presentation there and the link to the report is there. But this sharing is really key. A couple of critiques about it. It isn't for everything, and it's not for every type of research. There's the quick and dirty, as Robert Chambers originally described it, is a good thing in one way. It's giving quick solutions back to those who can do something with it very quickly. But there's been critique about the credibility of it if it's quick and dirty, and there's the argument that, well, is it rigorous research? So just go back to my other point here. So therefore, there does really need to be a triangulation of methods. It does need to, so it's not without rigor, but, there is a group that don't like it because they see it as not kind of scientific research. So there is that critique. It is qualitative. It does fall in the qualitative. There are some quantitative stuff that come from it, but it is an essay. So it's not for big data things. It's really more local emphasis, community emphasis. The facilitators' attitudes to the community are really key. If the facilitator, if I didn't believe in this approach and I was told to do it, I don't think it would work, because you do need to go with the essence and principles of it. So it's not for everybody. Some people might find it doesn't suit them. The timeline is too short. If the timeline needs to be longer. And if there was one thing I would say about my own research, which I suppose I have no control over, was I had a year from beginning to end to do it. So I couldn't really follow up on actions with the groups. That's why the key contact for me was really important, because they followed up with actions. But it would be more ideal if you were doing it over a slightly longer period of time, because then you could follow up with actions, or you could see, are they following with actions? So the timeline needs to be, like, this is a nice quote. One clue to success is the duration of a process. Social change based on mutual recognition and understanding needs a long-term approach, which multiplies the opportunities for interaction around stakeholders. And time to reflect and learn to be empowered. So it's not something you could do very quickly, so it does need slightly longer. Facilitation skills required and rigor needed for triangulation. So in summary, the key things with it are, and what differs to some of the other approaches that some of you have mentioned, is that participation is central, nearly more so than action. The actions in this ones are more developed from it. So meaningful actions and solutions are generated. So it's actions and solutions that kind of there. And some really nice older and recent studies done in this. Chambers is a more recent one. Interstate dialogue is really key. Group consensus is particularly important. And that's why some of the methods that you need, it's something about getting group consensus. The quick shared findings is really key. And then another key is the practical and flexible methods. So I will pause at that. Actually what I will do, so David, you can do the recording, is I'll just do the references so people can have them for the recording. They're the PRA references. And then for anybody interested, the references on assessing work integrated learning. So I will stop my share, maybe, might be the best. Okay. And
thank you, Geraldine.
Yeah.
Very, very much. It's been really terrific